Imagine 22 men trapped inside a tiny fort, completely surrounded by thousands of attackers. High on a mountain, there are no reinforcements coming to save them. There is no retreat. And yet, they decide not to surrender. They decide to hold out knowing they will not survive, to hold out to buy time, to hold out and do their duty to the very last breath. Meanwhile, for hours, from a small tower, one of them keeps the heliograph going, a mirror that sends flashes of sunlight to the world beyond, warning of the disaster that is closing in. This is the incredible story of the Battle of Saragarhi, the impossible last stand of the heroes of the British Raj. Let's start at the beginning. The year is 1897. The British Empire ruled, directly or indirectly, vast regions of the Indian subcontinent and its surrounding areas, a complex colonial system known as British India, or the British Raj. It was the age of the Great Game, the rivalry between the Russian Empire and the British Empire for influence in Central Asia. Among all those millions of square miles, one region stood out as especially troubled, one where, historically, maintaining stability had been extraordinarily difficult: the northwest frontier of the British Empire. There, in what is now the borderland between Pakistan and Afghanistan, the mountains and valleys were home to various tribes of Pashtun Muslims, independent, proud, and warlike tribes. On the Samana Range, in an attempt to control the territory, the British had established several forts in commanding positions. The two most important were Fort Lockhart and Fort Gulistan. Between them stood a key outpost, Fort Saragarhi. By that time, the telegraph already existed, and a line ran between Lockhart and Gulistan, but the enemy could easily sever it, leaving the two forts completely cut off since they lacked a direct line of sight. For this reason, Saragarhi, which stood higher and had a direct line of sight to both, was vital. With its heliograph, a simple instrument that sends signals by reflecting the sun's rays, it kept Lockhart and Gulistan in communication. As long as there was sunlight and Saragarhi stood firm, the link between the two main forts would remain unbroken. Garrisoning many of the forts across the Samana Range was the legendary 36th Sikh Regiment of the British Indian Army, a unit composed entirely of Indian Sikhs, except for the senior officers, who were of British descent. Sikhs are the followers of Sikhism, a religion founded in the 15th century in the Punjab region. At the head of the regiment was Lieutenant Colonel John Houghton, stationed at Lockhart, alongside 168 Sikh soldiers. His second in command, Major Deveux, was at Gulistan with 175 soldiers. At Sartop there were 21 Sikh soldiers. At Dar, 41. At Sangar, 44. And finally, at Saragarhi, 21. We shall soon return to these men, destined to pass into history. Now several Pashtun tribes have joined forces and risen in arms against the British. In recent days, they have attacked and destroyed positions on the Samana Range and in the surrounding area. On the British side, General Yeatman Biggs sets out from Hangu on the 7th of September 1897 with some 2,500 men to bring supplies and reinforcements to Samana. He reaches Fort Lockhart the following day, the 8th. By the 11th, between 20,000 and 25,000 Pashtun fighters of the Orakzai and Afridi tribes have massed at Khangarbar, very close to Samana. That same day, troubling news arrives. Several thousand of them begin moving east through the Kanki Valley, probably to strike at Hangu, which has been left unprotected. General Yeatman Biggs has to react immediately and heads back towards Hangu, moving along the Samana Range parallel to the Pashtun forces. With his regiment exhausted, he manages to reach his objective by nightfall. But that is the opportunity the Pashtuns have been waiting for. Now the forts of Samana are once again left with no protection beyond that of the few men of the 36th. It is the perfect moment to launch the final attack. With no time to lose, at dawn on the 12th, thousands of Pashtun warriors hurl themselves against the forts of Samana. One group besieges Gulistan, cutting it off from Saragarhi. Another moves between Saragarhi and Lockhart. And finally, the main Pashtun host surrounds Little Saragarhi, ready to wipe it off the map. Inside the fort are 21 soldiers, all of them Indian Sikhs. Their leader is Havildar, or Sergeant, Ishar Singh. With him are 1 corporal, 1 lance corporal, and 18 sepoys, or privates. Among them stands out Gurmukh Singh, responsible for operating the heliograph and thus for maintaining the link with Gulistan and Lockhart. Most of these men are very young, in their 20s and early 30s. They come from rural areas and have enlisted in the 36th to escape poverty and seek a chance to prosper. As Sikhs, they proudly wear the dastar, the turban that holds the long hair they are forbidden to cut, and they carry the kirpan, a symbolic knife which they must never part with. In addition to the 21 soldiers, there is someone else, a follower, that is, an auxiliary who performs support tasks such as cooking and cleaning, but who is not permitted to bear arms. He is said to have been called Dad. Before storming the little fort, the Pashtuns try to secure its surrender, but they are met by the implacable figure of Sergeant Ishar Singh. We can get some sense of this man's temperament if we credit the words of the soldier and historian James Lunt, who wrote, "Ishar Singh was a somewhat turbulent character whose independent nature had brought him more than once into conflict with his military superiors. In camp, he was a nuisance. In the field, magnificent. Thus, there will be no surrender." Some 10,000 Pashtuns then prepare to finish off Saragarhi. They surround it on every side except the south, where a gorge makes an assault almost impossible. Very quickly, a storm of Pashtun gunfire begins to rain down upon the little fortress. Throughout the long hours of the battle, Pashtun fire remains constant and scarcely allows the Sikhs to show themselves above the parapets. Soon, the Pashtuns decide to launch the first assault against the isolated position. Their numerical superiority is overwhelming. They are like the sea. They seem to have no end. But it is precisely their sheer numbers and the fact that they are forced to expose themselves to advance that give the Sikhs clear opportunities to shoot, and they are not going to waste them. The Pashtuns begin to fall one after another, to such an extent that, astonishingly, they break off the attack. The first great assault is over, and the Sikhs manage to hold out. However, the defenders of the 36th fail to notice a small but decisive detail. 2 Pashtuns have managed to crawl into a blind spot by the wall. Wasting no time, they begin to undermine its foundations. If they are not stopped quickly, the wall will soon crumble, and with it, the Sikhs' slender hopes of survival. From Gulistan, Major Deveux watches in despair as the catastrophe unfolds, but he can do nothing. He cannot send reinforcements. He cannot act, for his own fort is also under siege. All he can do is send repeated heliograph messages warning of what is happening. Unfortunately, they do not seem to be received in the tower at Saragarhi, where the heliograph operator, Gurmukh Singh, no doubt struggles to maintain communication amid the chaos of the assault. From Lockhart, Lieutenant Colonel Houghton cannot see the 2 Pashtuns digging beneath the wall, because his line of sight does not allow him to. Even so, he feels the same anguish as Deveux at being unable to help his men. He is the regiment's senior officer, the man ultimately responsible for those soldiers' lives. Although his position is not under attack, there is little he can do with the resources at his disposal. He is limited to sending a heliograph message to Saragarhi, telling them not to waste ammunition. They have 400 rounds per defender. It may seem like a lot, but against an enemy of this scale, it is not. A cold calculation shows that even if the 21 men of Saragarhi were to use every single one of their rounds with deadly effectiveness, they still could not bring down the 10,000 Pashtuns attacking them. Meanwhile, the punishment raining down on the little fort does not cease. On several occasions, the attackers try to set fire to the wooden gate and force it open, but they are stopped time and again by the defenders' gunfire. Yet the savage Pashtun onslaughts are beginning to take their toll on the Sikhs. At noon, Gurmukh sends a message to Lockhart. One of the 21 soldiers is already dead, and another is wounded. Lieutenant Colonel Houghton can bear the situation no longer. In desperation, he decides to send a small contingent out from Lockhart to divert the Pashtun warriors' attention and thus relieve the pressure on Saragarhi. But the attempt is in vain. That scant force can do nothing against the thousands of attackers already well positioned around the British forts. Still, the men of Saragarhi continue to hold out against the enemy for hours, despite the overwhelming numerical odds. Unfortunately for them, their situation, already tremendously difficult, is soon to become desperate. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Gurmukh sends a new message by heliograph. They are running low on ammunition. Houghton's tension at Lockhart is unbearable. He decides to launch a fresh attempt to come to their aid. This time, taking an extreme risk, he personally leads nearly 100 men, more than half of those he has at Lockhart, and sets out for Saragarhi. Whether he will arrive in time remains to be seen. Almost simultaneously, the two Pashtuns who had been digging in the wall's blind spot finally achieve their long-sought objective. A section of the wall collapses, opening up a large breach. It is difficult to reconstruct exactly what happens at Saragarhi from that critical moment onwards. The Pashtuns hurl themselves with renewed force at the gap. The Sikhs, likely still led by Sergeant Ishar Singh, move to the breach to hold back the enemy hordes. The brave Indians fight with ferocity. They know their lives depend on it. Tragically, by concentrating on that position, they leave the rest of the wall irretrievably exposed, allowing fresh waves of Pashtuns to swarm over it and break in unopposed at several points at once. The fighting turns savage. Possibly even the follower, Dad, is forced into the fray. The problem is that now, in the near hand-to-hand struggle, the weight of numbers tells in the starkest possible way. The Sikhs begin to fall quickly. It is at this moment that the greatest acts of heroism unfold. One of the Sikhs, lying wounded on a bed, decides not to part with his weapon. Almost unbelievably, he manages to kill as many as 4 enemies before being cut down. And amid the chaos, Gurmukh Singh sends one final harrowing message, remarkable both for the grimness of the situation and for the profound sense of duty it reveals. It says, "They are getting in now. Shall I go on signaling, or shall I take up a rifle?" Almost certainly with no time to wait for a reply, he chooses the second option. Gurmukh barricades himself inside a room. He is probably now the last defender still alive. Knowing he is doomed, he decides, as his comrades have done, to fight on to the very end. He lets out a war cry, a jaikara. Then, with his rifle raised, he brings down one Pashtun, then another, and another, and another, and another, until 20 of them lie dead. The Pashtuns, desperate to stop so deadly a threat, decide to set the complex on fire. In this way, they finally kill Gurmukh. Another version of events relates that Gurmukh himself, seeing that his ammunition is running out, resolves to take his own life just before being struck down by the enemy. Be that as it may, the last Sikh falls and, with him, Saragarhi. Shortly before this outcome, Houghton and his men had managed to cover barely half of the 1.5 miles separating Lockhart from Saragarhi when they saw the Pashtuns storm the fortress walls. Houghton knew at that precise moment that everything was over. The Battle of Saragarhi was a minor victory for the Pashtuns, but at an exceptionally high price. Although they succeeded in killing the 22 defenders and destroying the post, they lost at least 200 men in the attempt. Some sources put the figure much higher, The fort was abandoned shortly afterwards by the Muslims, and the British retook it. On entering the ruins, they were horrified by the brutalities inflicted upon the bodies of the fallen Sikhs, a clear sign of Pashtun fury at the heavy losses suffered during the assault. Even so, the Pashtuns did not achieve their ultimate objective. They were repelled from the Samana Range before they could capture any of the main forts. And, a few months later, the British defeated them decisively and secured their surrender. Thus ended the so-called Tira campaign of 1897 to 1898. As for those who fell at Saragarhi, their sacrifice was not forgotten. The 21 Sikh soldiers were posthumously awarded the Indian Order of Merit, the highest gallantry award an Indian soldier could receive from the British Empire at that time. Today, more than a century later, the defenders of Saragarhi are still admired and remembered, especially by the Sikh community, for whom that heroic act remains a source of pride and a powerful affirmation of collective identity. The Battle of Saragarhi is, without question, one of the most extraordinary last stands in history. The vast numerical imbalance between the opposing forces is the first thing that captures our attention. But what truly makes it memorable is what it represents. The idea of fulfilling one's duty to the very end, of self-sacrifice for a greater purpose, and, ultimately, of never surrendering.